Good evening and welcome to the Georgetown lecture. It comes to the fifth and last lecture of the academic year at PISAI. I'm delighted to welcome you all. Our institute is especially pleased to welcome you after the election of the Pope Leo XIV, whose pontificate began with the building bridges. I believe that interreligious dialogue, and particularly Muslim-Christian dialogue, is the most important factor for peace in the Middle East and in the Holy Land. And we pray in a special way for the Holy Land now. We are confident that the Holy Father will continue to support our mission, following in the footsteps of Pope Francis, who worked tirelessly to build a better world. We need practitioners of dialogue with Muslims. In 2015, I remind you, Pope Francis gave a speech to the PISAI Assembly. He said that the Institute's mission is to educate people in Muslim-Christian dialogue. This will ensure that partners do not restrict themselves to socio-political analysis of religion, but instead embark on a path that respects the dignity and right of others. Culture and education are therefore key for establishing sincere dialogue, rather than conciliatory syncretism. A soft and accommodating approach, which says yes to everything in order to avoid the problems, ends up being a way of deceiving others and denying them the good which we have been given to share generously with others. Education is the basis of peace because it prevents extremism and fundamentalism with others, and fundamentalisms, which often stem from ignorance. During his apostolic journeys, Pope Francis also emphasized the role of prayer in overcoming selfishness and embracing freedom. I would like today to thank Professor Ali Muhammad MODASSIR to be here with us. Thank you very much, Professor, that you accepted my invitation. And we are very honored that you are with us and you want really to share with us your thinking about, your thought about love, divine love in Islam. And thank you, Dr. Deborah Tonelli, for to be here and to be as representative of Georgetown University. And I pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Wasim. Eminencies, Excellencies, Professors, friends, it is a great pleasure to introduce the 19th Georgetown Lecture on Contemporary Islam and the second by faculty from Ali Hamad bin Khalifa University, Doha. The purpose of the Georgetown Lectures series on contemporary Islam is always and again to build bridges for dialogue, learn about each other, overcome prejudice, and find commonalities capable of creating communion. The theme of today's lecture, Divine Love in Islam, from Quranic foundations to Ibn Arabi's metaphysical visions, particularly apt for this purpose. During the Mass for the beginning of his pontificate in May 18, Pope Leo XIV said, "This is the hour for love. The heart of the gospel is the love of God that makes us brothers and sisters." With my predecessor, Leo XIII, we can ask ourselves today, if this criterion were to prevail in the world, would not every conflict cease and peace return? Concluding his homily, Pope Leo XIV invited to build a church founded on God's love, a sign of unity, a missionary church that opens its arms to the world, proclaims the word, allows itself to be made restless by history, and becomes a leaven of harmony for humanity. The next day, Pope Leo XIV immediately met with the representatives of other churches and ecclesial communities and other religions, immediately giving a tangible sign that he wanted to continue the path taken by his predecessors. Now, the Pontiff said, is the time for dialogue and building bridges. I am therefore pleased and grateful for the presence of representatives of other religious traditions who share the search for God and His will, which is always and only the will of love and life for men and women and for all creatures. You have witnessed the remarkable efforts made by Pope Francis in favor of interreligious dialogue. Through his words and actions, he opened new avenues of encounter to promote the culture of dialogue as the path, mutual collaboration as the code of the conduct, reciprocal understanding as the method and standard. Quotation from a document on fraternity, human fraternity. Continuing his speech, Pope Leo XIV stressed the growing commitment of the Catholic Church and Muslims to dialogue and fraternity. This approach, the Pope said, based on mutual respect and freedom of conscience, is a solid foundation for building bridges between our communities. Concluding this speech, the Pope emphasized the relationship between fraternity and peace. The witness of our fraternity, said the Pope, which I hope we will be able to show with effective gestures, will certainly contribute to building a more peaceful world, something that all men and women of goodwill desire in their hearts. Today's lecture, like the previous 8, is part of a larger journey of fraternity, just as the Pontiff, in continuity with his predecessors, asked us to do. It is with a great pleasure that I introduce now our speaker. Muhammad MODASSIR Ali is a senior researcher at the Muhammad bin Hamad Al Thani Center for Muslim Contribution to Civilization and Assistant Dean for Students' Affairs at the College of Islamic Studies, Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha, Qatar. Dr. Ali earned his master and PhD in comparative religion from the International Islamic University, Islamabad. His master's thesis focused on the concept of revelation and prophecy in Hinduism, a critical study, while his doctoral dissertation explored the Catholic concept of revelation since the Second Vatican Council and its impact on the Christian view of the other. His areas of specialization include interfaith relations, comparative theology, Islamic intellectual history, and Islamic philosophy. His scholarly work engages with themes such as revelation, religious diversity, spirituality, Sirah studies, and the Muslim contribution to world civilization. Dr. Ali has actively participated in international academic forums, including Georgetown University's Building Bridges seminar series. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
This typology highlights the multidimensionality of the love relationship, which encompasses initiative, response, remembrance, and union. Then we have Abu Talib al-Makki, I'm going to leave him, Abu Hussein al-Nuri, the first, one of the earliest Sufis who called himself al-Ashiq, or the lover. This, by the way, is a term which is contended in the spiritual tradition, because many scholars say that since this is not a Quranic term, we should not use this term for God. I'm going to jump on to the next most important proponent of divine love, and that is Rabi'at al-Adawiyya. She died in 801 of the Hijri calendar, and of the Gregorian calendar. She was from Basra, and her doctrine of selfless love came out very, very strongly and had a huge influence on later Islamic, subsequent Islamic spirituality. So she downplayed worship driven by fear of hell or hope for paradise, insisting instead on loving God for his own sake. Her famous prayer encapsulates her ethos. If I worship you, O God, for fear of hell, burn me in it. If I worship you for the hope of paradise, exclude me from it. But if I worship you for your own sake, do not withhold from me your eternal beauty. Rabi'a's emphasis on disinterested love, al-hubbu lil-dhat, set a precedence for later Sufi discussions on sincerity, annihilation, and divine beauty. By the 10th century, the discourse on love was well established in Sufi manuals, most notably in Qushayri's Ar-Risala al-Qushayriya, which we have mentioned earlier. Love was classified as a spiritual station attained through zuhud or asceticism, remembrance, and ethical conduct. Later, Al-Hajwini from Afghanistan, from modern-day Afghanistan, and others continued to refine the distinction between self-motivated and God-centered love. This trajectory culminated in the work of Al-Ghazali, his magnum opus, of course, Ihya Ulumuddin, or the revival of the Islamic sciences, synthesizing the Islamic legal dimension of Islam, the legal dimension of Islam with spiritual psychology. In his famous Kitab al-Mahabba wa-Shawq wal-Uns wal-Rida, the book of love, as it's short, the book of love and desire, and affection and contentment, he articulates a theory of love grounded in knowledge. To know God is to love. The highest joy of the afterlife, he argues, is the beatific vision, seeing God, which is reserved for those who cultivated love in this life. For Ghazali, divine love is both epistemological and experiential, grounded in theology and nourished through worship. Taken together, these early Sufis laid the intellectual and experiential groundwork for later spiritual thought. Their articulation of love as a divine gift, a transformative force, and a unifying principle shaped the trajectory of Islamic spirituality and prepared the soil in which Ibn Arabi would root his metaphysical system of love, being, and knowledge. And now I turn to Ibn Arabi, but before that, I'll give a very short description of him. I'm sure most of you would know him, but just as a matter of remembrance, Muhyiddin Abdullah Ibn Arabi, most universally known as Ibn Arabi, was a preeminent Andalusian Sufi, metaphysician, theologian, poet, and philosopher. Born in Murcia, in present-day Spain, in 1165 CE, he spent his early years in Seville, where he received a traditional Islamic education in Quran, prophetic tradition, jurisprudence, theology, and Arabic literature. From an early age, he demonstrated an intense spiritual inclination and became known for his spiritual experiences and visions, many of which would shape his later metaphysical writings. You would all know about his meeting with Averroes or Ibn Rushd when he was only 15 years old, and he was actually summoned by Averroes because he had become so popular because of his spiritual experiences and visions. Excuse me. By his 20s, Ibn Arabi had begun his spiritual travels called the Rihla, a practice which is central to Sufi life. His journey took him through the Islamic West in Al-Maghrib, where he met numerous scholars and Sufi masters. Around 1200, he left for the east, visiting Mecca to perform the Hajj, which became a pivotal moment in his spiritual and intellectual formation. It was in Mecca that he began composing his famous mystical compendium Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, or the Meccan openings, a vast and complex work that blends theology, cosmology, jurisprudence, and spiritual psychology. Ibn Arabi eventually settled in Damascus, where he lived until his death in 1240 CE. There he completed many of his major works, including Fusus al-Hikam, the Bezels of Wisdom, a concise yet profound metaphysical treatise exploring the wisdom embodied in the lives of various prophets. His grave is in Damascus, and it remains a site of visitation and deep reverence. He authored more than 300 books, many of which have been lost. Very few survive, and he undoubtedly stands as one of the most significant and original thinkers in the Islamic intellectual tradition. And his works continue to inspire theological, philosophical, and spiritual inquiry, not only within the Islamic tradition, largely within the Jewish, Christian, and now even Far Eastern tradition. Ibn Arabi's vision of love. So now, the remaining part of my presentation is largely based on the 178th chapter of Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah is a collection of 560 chapters of varying lengths. The chapter on love is the largest chapter of this whole book. So this book is in 4 huge volumes, and it has been edited by multiple scholars. The latest edition is, of course, by Professor Eric Winkle, and before that by Harun Yahya, in several volumes. So Harun Yahya just edited the first volume and the first half of the second volume in about 14 volumes alone. So you can almost imagine that a full edition of Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah would come down probably in 25 to 30 volumes. And that work is still in progress, by the way. Ibn Arabi begins by telling us that love is not defined. He writes, "People have differed in their attempts to define love, but I have not seen anyone define it by its essence in a manner that captures its reality, because this is inconceivable. Those who have attempted definitions have only described its effects and outcomes and necessary consequences, especially given that love is an attribute of the divine." He goes on to add that noble things fall into 2 categories: those that can be defined and those that cannot. Love, according to those who truly understand it and speak of it, is among those things which cannot be delimited by definition. It is known only by those in whom it resides, and for whom it is a defining quality. While its nature cannot be grasped intellectually, its presence cannot be denied. And then he goes on to tell us that love essentially is a matter of dhawq or experience. So you can only talk about love if you have experienced love. And one of the importance of Ibn Arabi, that's what he claims at least, is that he says that I've not put in writing anything that I've not experienced myself. So that is a huge claim to make by one of the foremost thinkers of the Islamic tradition. He then goes on to talk about Quranic terms which overlap with the term hubb, or love. And these for him are 4. Number one, of course, is al-hub itself. Number two, al-wud, or affection. Number three, ishq, which is passionate love. And number four, hawa, which means desire. These four designations, according to Ibn Arabi, represent facets or stations of love, maqamat al-mahabba, as he calls it. More precisely, there are dimensions that orbit around love, which we have talked about already. What distinguishes Ibn Arabi's contribution is the precision and spiritual insight with which he analyzes each of these terms, elaborating on their unique psychological and mystical features and articulating their differences despite their shared core. He acknowledges, however, that while hope or love encompasses these four names, each has its own distinctive state. So the first one that he talks about is al-hawa. Having outlined the major terms associated with divine love, Ibn Arabi turns to one of its earliest stirrings, hawa, which literally means desire. In his metaphysical framework, hawa is the first flicker of love, a movement of the soul triggered by perception, kindness, or divine beneficence. These are the three reasons why hawa moves or desire moves in a human being. Yet, unlike hope, which implies constancy and spiritual elevation, hawa is unstable and ambiguous. It may lead the seeker toward God or distract them with illusions of love, unrooted in divine command. Ibn Arabi divides hawa into two types of categories. The first is what he describes as falling into the heart. Hawa, one of the meanings, literal meanings of hawa means to fall down. That is the emergence of love from the realm of the unseen into the visible real, taking root in the heart. This hawa arises from three causes. Number one, sight. Number two, sound. And number three, kindness. And sometimes from all three together, or from a combination thereof. Ibn Arabi explains this falling as a transition of love, which is the soul's inclination toward a particular object and which exists in potential within the human being into actuality, prompted by sensory experience, a report, or a gesture of beneficence. He writes, the cause for the emergence of the reality of hawa in the heart is one or more of the following: sight, sound, or benefaction. The strongest and most lasting of these is sight. It's not a coincidence that we say, love at first sight in English language, because it is not altered by union. Sound is more vulnerable, he says, since the imagined image evoked by hearing may not actually match the actual form. As for love that arises from beneficence, it is conditioned and may be nullified by heedlessness, even if beneficence continues, as the benefactor is not directly observed. The second category of hawa, according to Ibn Arabi, only exists in the context of divine law, which is the Sharia. It is reflected in the divine command that is mentioned in the Quran to Prophet David. Judge between people with justice and do not follow hawa. That is, do not follow what you yourself desire, but rather follow what I, or love, namely what I have legislated for you. Here, hawa refers to personal inclinations that may oppose the divine will, and thus God commands his prophet to prefer the path of divine legislation over his own subjective preferences. The second kind of hawa involves reorienting one's desire towards divine truth, as established by revelation. Ibn Arabi comments, true hawa, which is in fact love, is the love of union with an existing being or beings. God has demanded that this love be redirected and attached to the truth he has legislated to his path, as opposed to the many other paths that do not lead to him. If we seek to distinguish between hawa and hub from a Sufi perspective, we may say that hawa represents the initial emergence of love into consciousness, its first activation. In its blameworthy form, hawa attaches itself to what is divinely, in its praiseworthy form, hawa attaches itself to what is divinely sanctioned. This is noble, disciplined desire, frequently praised in Sufi writings. The blameworthy hawa, by contrast, is that which clings to what has not been prescribed by God. It is the kind of desire that the Quran refers to in the Quran. Have you seen the one who has taken his hawa as his God? أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who considers his own caprice or his own desires as God? The second dimension of love that Ibn Arabi mentions is al-ishq. If hawa marks the dawn of love, then ishq, or passionate, overwhelming love, represents its climatic intensity. While early Sufis treated ishq with caution due to its potentially unbridled nature, and also because ishq had significant physical connotations. So it was largely used when people were talking about erotic love or love between two physical entities. Excuse me. Ibn Arabi explores its metaphysical depths. He views it as the state in which divine manifestations consume the heart entirely, leaving no room for anything but God. The progression from hawa to ishq thus reflects not only an increase in intensity, but also a deepening existential transformation. The term ishq, or passionate love, has generally been understood as an intensification of mahabba. Ibn Arabi notes that although the term ishq does not occur in the Quran explicitly, its essential meaning is captured in the verse, but those who believe are stronger in love for God. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. According to Ibn Arabi, love is not called ishq until it becomes overwhelming, when the lover is seized by divine influxes and overpowered by the manifestations of God's merciful attributes, such that nothing remains in the heart except God, the beloved. In this state, the self is entirely consumed in divine love. The word ishq has at times been used as a synonym for hub, by some early Sufis, such as Malik bin Dinar and Abdul Wahid ibn Zayd. Having said that, it needs to be added that Sufi masters have approached the term ishq with caution, and I already mentioned this along with people. The third and final term that Ibn Arabi uses as a dimension of love is al-wud. In contrast to the suddenness of hawa and the fire of ishq, wud symbolizes the settled and enduring nature of love. It is also a Quranic term and one of the attributes of God. It is love in repose, firm, unwavering, and fully integrated into the soul's disposition. Ibn Arabi's insight into al-wud revealed the maturity of divine love. It is not subject to fluctuation, and its presence is marked by serenity and constancy, mirroring God's own attribute, al-wadud, or the most affectionate. He writes, "Wud is the stability of love or passion, or of desire, regardless of the emotional intensity. When the one experiencing it remains constant, unmoved by changes in condition, adversity or comfort, acceptance or rejection, when he maintains love for the one in whom his beloved is manifest, then this constancy is what is called wood. This is the meaning of God's statement in the Quran. The most merciful will bestow for them al-wood, that is a stable and enduring affection in the hearts of God, of both God and his righteous servants. God thus attributes wood to his believing servants, and his affection becomes manifest in their love for his allies or his friends, al-awliya. I'm going to skip some of the more details up here on al-wood and go to the next section of the 178th chapter, which is the causes of love in Ibn Arabi's thought. Having mapped the lexicon of love, Ibn Arabi shifts focus to its underlying motivations. Why do beings love? What provokes this metaphysical attraction? He identifies three principal causes: beauty, beneficence, and the supererogatory devotion, or what we call in Arabic, an-nawafil or an-nafila. Those are the devotions or the rituals that any human being practices in addition to the compulsory or obligatory forms of devotion and rituals. These causes are not arbitrary. They reflect dimensions of the divine reality, refracted through the world of appearances. Each cause in its essence draws the soul back to its ultimate source, the beautiful, the beneficent, and the beloved. Each of these causes, Ibn Arabi argues, ultimately leads back to God as the true object of love, whether the lover realizes it or not. So the first cause of love is beauty, al-jamal. The first and most fundamental cause of love, according to Ibn Arabi, is beauty. He cites the very often cited hadith by Ibn Arabi, Inna Allah Jamilun Yuhibbul Jamal. God is beautiful and he loves beauty. Ibn Arabi explains that beauty is a self-essential attribute of God and one of his most beautiful names, namely Al-Jamil, or the beautiful, because beauty is intrinsic to the divine essence. God's love for beauty is in reality love for himself. Therefore, any human who falls in love due to beauty is, whether consciously or not, loving a manifestation of the divine. Ibn Arabi elaborates on this idea later in the chapter. I'm not going to go into those details. The second cause of beauty is what Ibn Arabi calls al-ihsan, or beneficence. Ibn Arabi asserts that true beneficence belongs only to God, who is the muhsin, or the beneficent. The quality of ihsan emanates directly from his divine name, and thus any act of generosity or goodness that inspires love is ultimately a manifestation of divine mercy and grace. Consequently, one who falls in love because of beneficence is in essence responding to God's attribute of ihsan and is thus in love with God himself. And I would like to I would like to remind you of the very famous hadith of Jibreel, when Angel Jibreel came to the Prophet in the form of a human being, and he asked him questions about what is Islam, what is submission, what is faith, and the third question was, what is beauty? And the Prophet answered, beauty, well, actually, it can be translated into what is beauty. It can be translated into what is doing excellent works, because the word that was used is ihsan in Arabic, which has both connotations. And the Prophet answered him, "An ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah." Beauty or excellence of work is to worship God as if you behold him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. And if you are not at that level, then you have to keep in mind that he certainly sees you. It means that God certainly beholds you. The third cause of love is the extra acts or the supererogatory acts, the nawafil. And these are particularly come in the form of nafil devotion or additional devotion. Ibn Arabi refers to the well-known hadith Qudsi, which we mentioned earlier, in which God declares that the servant continues to desire to draw close to him or nearer to him through these additional acts until God loves him. He interprets these nawafil as additions or ziyadat to the obligatory, which are the fara'id, acts of worship, drawing a parallel, a metaphysical parallel, just as the nawafil are surplus acts that deepen spiritual intimacy, so too is the created world an existential surplus. Ziyadatun fil wujud, he says. Why? Because the real existence is God's existence alone. The compulsory existence, the necessary existence is God's existence alone. An additional manifestation beyond the primary existence, which is wujud al-haq, which is God himself. In this view, creation is comparable to a nafila, or an act of divine generosity beyond the necessity of God's own being. God loves the cosmos as an extra, beautiful overflow of his essential reality, just as he loves the servant who offers more than what is required. I've got just one more page left. And this is the last of the categories that Ibn Arabi mentions in 178th chapter, which is Aqsamul Hub, or the categories of love. Ibn Arabi introduces a typology of love, distinguishing between divine love, spiritual love, and natural love. And then he moves on further, elevating love from a mere affective state to a structured metaphysical category. Divine loves belong to God and his elect. Spiritual love to the purified souls, and natural love to human inclinations. These categories illustrate how all forms of love, when rightly understood, participate in the divine and return to it. He states, there is in love, there is divine, spiritual, and natural. Divine love is the love of God for us, and also our love for him can be called divine. Spiritual love seeks to satisfy the beloved, leaving no requirement or wanting besides that. And natural love pursues to obtain all personal requirements, regardless of pleasing the beloved or not, and this is the case of love for most people today. The last part of his of the 174th chapter, and this is possibly the largest part of the chapter, in which he talks about 7 principal characteristics of people who truly love God, and 58 spiritual traits that any divine lover must have. I can't even start going over that, so I'm going to skip all that, and I'll move to the conclusion. In conclusion, it needs to be stated that from its Quranic foundations to its full flowering in the metaphysical reflections of Ibn Arabi, the concept of divine love emerges as a central axis of Islamic spirituality. The Quran portrays love as both divine attribute and an ethical imperative. The prophetic traditions reinforce love as a mode of devotion, solidarity, and faith. Early Sufi masters expanded this vision, locating love not only in the heart of ethical practice, but in the soul's yearning for union with the divine. Ibn Arabi, drawing upon this rich heritage, elevates love to a cosmic and ontological principle. In his writings, love becomes the secret of creation, the bridge between the visible and the unseen, the means through which the divine discloses himself. His subtle distinctions between hub, hawa, and ishq, and wud are not mere lexical exercises, but deeply mystical insights into the stages of proximity, intensity, and constancy in the divine-human relationship. To love in Ibn Arabi's vision is to know, and to know is to be. The divine lover and the beloved creation are not two, but manifestations of a single truth revealed through the mirror of love. Thus, in the Islamic Sufi tradition, love is not simply a path to God, it is the very mode by which God chooses to be known. This understanding of love as origin, path, and goal, and this is a typology that Ibn Arabi mentions several times in many of his books. Love as the origin, the path, and the goal. Ibn Arabi sometimes says the lover, love, and the beloved continues to inspire spiritual seekers across time, offering a language of intimacy with the divine that transcends fear, beauty, or reward, and instead roots faith in beauty, longing, and transcendental union. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. Thank you very much. We are really grateful for this lecture. You offered a panorama of divine love, very interesting, very stimulating, and illuminating, and showed its complexity, its ability to transform us, our inwardness, and our relationships with the human beings. So in some way, the mysticism of divine love impacts our being in the world, but at the same time, it requires to be a human choice. We have to be able to embrace him, to welcome him, and it is also an effort for the human beings. So thank you very much, very, very interesting and stimulating. And at the beginning, I forgot to mention that the audience can ask questions using the Q&A button below. So I don't know if we have questions from the audience now, or if Wasim Salman would like to comment part of this speech.
Yeah, thank you, Professor, really, for this very amazing lecture. I used to hear something or to listen to conferences about jihad, violence in Quran. Yeah, much more than about love, mercy in the Quran, al-Rahma, al-Hub, so on. It's really amazing, and I've never thought there was so much. There were so much words in the Quran, and the Quran talks so much about love. So the question I heard really your lecture as theological thought. So we say we don't hear anymore. We accuse Muslim scholars that they don't do any more theology, but I heard today a real theological lecture. So I read so many books about some, and even Al-Imam al-Tayyib says it is not possible to have doctrinal dialogue or theological dialogue between Christian and Muslim. But what I heard from you, the concept of God, I see that we can talk about God. How it is, what you said is really Islamic, it's Muslim. is not Christian. So I don't find the gospel. You didn't speak about the gospel. The texts that you quoted are not the gospel, not the Old Testament, is the Quran. It's Muslim speech. So, but it is very common, similar to theological or concept of God in Christianism. Do you think that we can dialogue about God? Is the Muslim God different from the Christian God, or do you find many similarity between them? What do you think about that?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Wasim. This is an extremely loaded question, and there just cannot be a simple and straightforward yes and no answer to it. Most of the most significant and deep questions are not supposed to have a yes or no answer anyway. So, starting from there, I would like to. I remember reading Fitzgerald Shun a few days back, in which he talks about the distinction between Christian and Muslim theology. And the reason that he gives, if I remember correctly, is that so before I come to Shun, let me explain one of the distinctive features of theology is, if theology is rational and logical, then it tends to be divisive and it creates divisions. You can see that not only between different religious traditions, you can see that within your own Islamic or Christian or Jewish tradition. The way theology is done, for instance, between Catholics and Protestants, and the issues that are generated as a result of that, or the way the theology is done in the Islamic tradition between the Shia and the Sunnah, or the different factions of Islamic theological thought, you can see that because it tends to be rational, it almost by necessity creates a form of division. Whereas, and I mentioned this in the beginning of the paper as well, that if you approach God not necessarily through theological terms, but through spiritual terms, more from the ground, grassroots level, moving up, you would realize that there is much in common between our perceptions of God and between the Islamic perception of God and the Christian perception of God. There's even more common between our experience of God and the Christian experience of the Godhead. You could go on and read, excuse me, please, Saint Bonaventure, Saint Teresa, and Saint Francis of Assisi. If you were to remove their names from their works and slap on that a Muslim name, it would be difficult to understand, is this guy, is this author a Muslim author or a Christian author? Except, of course, when it comes to the issue of talking about specifically about God the Son. Otherwise, the experiential level of theology, which is very often missed out in our mutual dialogue, that shows us that there is much in common. Whereas if you take hardline theology, which is rational and tries to posit its premises on logical grounds, then obviously I won't say there's no room for discussion and no room for having a dialogue, but it becomes a bit difficult. More particularly because of the perceptions of Trinity that we have in the Muslim world and perceptions of Trinity, which are very, very different. The way the Christian world perceives Trinity is very different from what we Muslims see Trinity as. And that does not help in that dialogical process as well. So it basically goes down to, the understanding that we have and we have developed in our respective traditions.
Thank you very much.
So thank you. We have a question from the audience, or maybe two. Let me check. No, one question. Soraya Youth asks if you can tell us what you have already published on this topic.
So I've actually published only one paper, which came out as a book chapter, in fact. And this was also, credit to Georgetown University, because through their Building Bridges initiative. So I was there back in, I participated in one of their programs back in 2022, I believe. And that was about grace and mercy. And I talked about the Islamic grace and mercy in the prophetic tradition. So that has been published very recently, I think, in the beginning of this semester, this year, by the way. Although it took place back in 2022, but it came out in published form this year. And there's another chapter which is coming out possibly by the end of this year, which is related to, once again, in the Islamic tradition, in dialogue with the Christian tradition. It just slips my mind right now. But that will be published from Georgetown University Press as well.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, I am not an expert of Muhyiddin Arabi, but I know that he grew up in an interfaith environment, a crossroads of Jews, Christians, and Islam. So how important is interfaith dialogue to growing in one's faith as well?
Well, I'm reminded of Max Muller's statement, "He who knows one knows none." So I mean, I can say for myself, and I say it very, very openly and with the utmost sincerity, that in my journey of in my academic journey through the study of comparative religions, the two religions that have most enamored me and pulled me towards them are Hinduism and Catholicism within the Christian tradition. And if I knew that the truth was in any of these traditions, I wouldn't have second thoughts on embracing it immediately. But what I have realized in great depth is that the study of these traditions have actually provided me depth in my own tradition. The concept of love, as highlighted and mentioned, particularly in the writings of the early fathers, it just blows your mind. And when you come across an experience which you wonder whether you have actually got that experience through your own practices or not. So I definitely believe that interfaith dialogue, it does a great deal in enhancing your own spiritual experience, your own experience of your own tradition, as well as creating the right mood and the mode and the atmosphere where people can start talking, not at the level of scholars, but, at the level of, everyday people, common human beings. They are able to establish connections and they start talking to each other. So it's definitely the go-to area as far as I'm concerned. And I will know what the world would look like if there's no interfaith dialogue taking place today. You already live in a world torn apart by all kinds of problems. And with a world with no interfaith dialogue, I mean, that's kind of inconceivable. I don't know where that would end to.
Thank you very much. I am checking if we have other questions from the audience or other comments from Wasim. So, okay, so we have a question from Katharina Zimmerbauer. You said that love means to prefer the beloved to anything else. Does that mean that to love God is to prefer him to anything created? Is there also a way of loving God through love for creation?
Oh yes, absolutely. Because particularly in the Sufi tradition, we are required to be godlike. The Quran tells us, "Kunu rabbaniyina," be godlike. And the tradition, it's not an authentic tradition, but it is very widely quoted in the Islamic tradition, particularly in the Islamic Sufi tradition, is "Takhallaqu bi akhlaqillah." Assume the characteristics or the characteristic traits of God. So if I'm merciful, if I'm kind and merciful because I have drawn that from God's kindness and mercy. And in our tradition, all forms and all attributes and all characteristics, they come from God. It's part of our belief that good and evil, all forms, it comes from God. So as a result of that, whatever we do is nothing but sharing in a characteristic of God which he has bestowed upon us, although he does tell us that there are characteristics of mine which you should assume and prefer, and there are characteristics which you should stay away from. And this is taught in a wonderful prayer of the Prophet, in which he tells us, Allahumma inni a'udhu bi ridaka min sakhatik. O God, I seek your refuge in your contentment and satisfaction and happiness, and I move away from your anger. Wa bi mu'afatika min uqubatik. And I seek your refuge in your forgiveness, so that I'm kept away from your punishment. And I seek wabika minka, and I seek refuge in you from you, which means I seek refuge in your qualities of beauty, so that you move me away from your qualities of majesty, which are anger. And God is the avenger. He gets angry. He is the sublime. He is boastful. So, which is why we Muslims are required not to follow those traits. So, loving God is nothing but partaking from the love of God itself. So there's no way that you should be loving anything as a Muslim more than God himself. And the Prophet clearly tells us, if your love for God is second to anything else, you're not a believer.
Thank you very much. We don't have still other questions, but okay. I have just a small question about the beauty, because from my point of view, it is a very challenging category. In our contemporary world, beauty is something external, and we have lost its deeper meaning. In the last part of your talk, you analyzed the concept as beauty as an excellent work consistent with our ability to worship God. But it is not, as I understood, it is not a form of moralism. but in some way the beauty is able to connect human ability to love God, to worship God, and moral behaviors. So, are you agree with this summary?
The characterization of beauty that I mentioned was entirely based on the semantics of Arabic language. So the word that is used in that authentic tradition of the Prophet is, what is ihsan? The root word for ihsan is hasana. Hasana means a number of things. It means to be good. It means to be beautiful. It means to be elevated. All these meanings are there. Its superlative degree, sorry, not superlative degree, but its higher degree is ihsan, which means doing something which is excellent continuously. And so one of the literal meanings of the word ihsan is beauty, which is why, in fact, a profound beauty. What is profound beauty? Which is why some translators have actually translated this hadith of the Prophet in these terms. Some of them, Professor William Chittick, for instance, he translates ihsan as doing excellent works or doing what is excellent. But I've forgotten the name of other scholars who translate this hadith as what is beauty. And so the Prophet tells us that beauty is to behold God himself, or to behold the source of beauty himself.
Thank you very much for this clarification, very helpful. We have a question by Jean-Marc Balan. According to Ibn Arabi, can I love God and remain who I am? Or should I vanish like a moth burning in the flame of a candle? What remains of me when I love God?
Okay, so this is an excellent question. One of the things that we need to remember, and I think I should have mentioned it, although I didn't, is that, and I'm sure that we have this in all religious traditions in one way or the other, is Islam always considers the idea that the message of God reaches people according to their capacity. There are people who are bound or who are prone to, doing acts of kindness. So they can get from Islam all that matters to them, which is doing acts of kindness. There are people who are prone to philosophical discussions about, various aspects of Islam. And in the Islamic tradition, you have that rich tradition of philosophical discussion, theological, spiritual, you name it. So the idea that you need to vanish in your love of God is a theoretical proposition. It makes sense if it becomes part of your experience. So it becomes meaningful when it becomes part of your experience of that theoretical proposition. And we all do that according to our own spiritual capacities. So there are people in the Islamic tradition, like Mansur al-Hallaj, who went on to say, "Ana al-Haq, I'm the truth," or everything in my cloth is God, which means that he reached a level where he reached a level of annihilation and self-effacement, where he could not see himself at all, and all he saw was God. But then he had to psychologically and spiritually he could have maintained that, but he came back, and that's what our heart always does. So these are acts of the heart, which have repercussions for the physical body as well. I mean, I'm reminded of I don't know if it's Saint Teresa, who in her devotion to Christ, she actually used to get the wounds of Christ on her body. So, or it might be Joan of Arc. I've forgotten right now. I've left Christian theology almost 10 years ago. But so I mean, they become so involved with their love for Christ that Christ almost becomes embodied in them, and aspects of Christ start appearing on their physical body as well. So it's each person according to his or her capacity, ability to interact with God, engage with this experience, and then come out of the experience to go back into it once again. And the Arabs, Sufis, especially the Arab-speaking Sufis, they say this is the act of the heart. And the heart is known in Arabic as al-qalb. The literal meaning of qalb is something that is always changing. So it's difficult to stay in one state. You're always changing. Or you're not always changing, but you have the ability to change. So you can become one with God, come back out of it, go back again in a state of reunion, come back out of it. But Ibn Arabi does say that there are very, very few people who can actually have a union with God and then stay at that level. I think he says only prophets are allowed this level. Wallahu a'lam.
Thank you very much. We don't have further questions. Wasim?
Yeah, just like it is time, really, we must finish. So thank you very much, Professor Muhammad Mudassir Ali.
My pleasure.
I'm very grateful, really, to hear about love, about al-hub, al-ashq, al-hawa, all these words in Arabic that I've never heard about. So this real, very, very, very interesting analysis of these words. It's easier to talk about love in Greek, in Latin, but never in Arabic. So Arabic is a very rich language. So I learned something about my language. I'm very grateful. So thank you very much. And really hope to see you soon in Rome, because we need something like that to develop this theological speech, this theological work. Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you, Deborah, and hope to see you.
I want to thank you, Professor Wasim, and Dr. Deborah. And I also want to thank my very good friend, Sam Wagner, who actually recommended me to you, of course, to Georgetown for giving me this, and PISAI for giving me this opportunity to exchange some views. Like you, I was actually completely baffled. Although I've read Ibn Arabi, but when I went into that chapter, it just threw me off, and I realized that perhaps I shouldn't have gone into this rich ocean. You have to be ready. You have to make yourself ready for, before diving into this rich ocean of Ibn Arabi. But alhamdulillah, it was through you that I got this opportunity to learn more about Ibn Arabi, and for this, I'm really thankful. And to all people who helped in holding this seminar as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank to all the staff of Georgetown, John Borelli and Sam, and thanks Deborah for this presence today. So I want to thank Sam, but now we know you directly. Really, it was a good recommendation, but now we are friends through this divine love. And I think I'm very, very glad to know you, really. So thank you very much. It was our last lecture of this year, and see you in the beginning in October to all of you. So have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali. Thank you, Wasim.
Okay.
I hope to meet you in person very soon.
Yeah.
Inshallah. Inshallah. God willing. Inshallah.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.